and give kind of an update on what's been happening at Snohomish County and answer any questions that you all might have. And so just really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and of course all the good work that's done by Rotary. And I think the involvement you have in the community and the service is so important. And so big thank you to each of you for the good work that you're doing. And I do have a monthly newsletter I put out from the county. So if there's ever anything that would be helpful for me to include in that, happy to do that. One thing that comes to mind is maybe the Imagination Library. If you're looking for more people to add, that's something I'd be happy to include if it would be helpful. So feel free to send those suggestions my way. I've been here, in the past years. I think I know just about everybody in the room, but in case there's somebody who doesn't know me, I'm Nate Nehring. I represent the northern part of Snohomish County on the county council. So Marysville, Arlington, Stanwood, Granite Falls, and Darrington are in my geographic district. There are 5 county council members who break up the legislative branch of county government, and so I'm one of those 5, and I feel really blessed to have that role. I've been in this position since 2017, and just really enjoy it. There's a lot of great people in county government, a lot of great community organizations that we get to partner with to do really good work, and there's lots of challenges we face as a community, but lots of great opportunities as well. So I look forward to talking about some of those this afternoon. And then on the personal note, my wife and I are both lifelong residents of Snohomish County. We actually lived in Stanwood just after we got married, and then we currently live in Arlington, where we're raising our 3 young kids. We've got a 4th on the way. So we've got a 6-year-old, 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and then we're expecting in June. So we're playing the zone defense at home and having a lot of fun with that. But we just really love living in Snohomish County and look forward to raising our family here. So I'll jump right into it. There's a few topics I'm going to cover: public safety, some economic development opportunities, the budget, but I'm happy to answer questions about anything, even if it's not included in the presentation here. I'll start with public safety, just because this seems to be the biggest priority for folks when I'm out in the community talking with people. When it comes to local government, public safety is sort of the preeminent responsibility that we have. And so I'm not sure if we can read this because the text is a little small, but I can read them off. Just some stats from our sheriff's office on different crime stats this past year in 2024 as compared to 2023. So the good news is a lot of these are down. Arson is down 43%, assaults are down 6%, rape down 2%, theft down 20%, vehicle theft down 34%. We do have some increases, so homicides are up 44%, kidnappings up 3%, and robbery up 7%. So again, that's data from the online crime data dashboard that the Sheriff's Office puts together. When it comes to public safety, I'll take a step back. One of the big things that we've seen recently, and that you may have read about in the paper, we're seeing a lot of violence amongst young people. So we hear about these stabbings in South Everett in the south part of the county, and gun violence. And a lot of that is due to gang-related activity. There's been a sort of a move in our state to go away from incarcerating people under the age of 18, so minors, trying to keep them out of jail. The downside of that, the consequence, is it sort of incentivizes gangs and others to go and recruit people who are minors to commit these crimes. And so we've heard instances of these gangs, whether it's out of Seattle or whatever, and they're operating throughout the Puget Sound, recruiting in the high schools, even the middle schools, to get these young people involved and have them do these horrific crimes, whether it's stabbings or other things. And so really tragic to see the increases in this sorts of violence, especially among young people. I think it is a direct result of some of that state level policy to move away from some of these accountability measures for people under 18. So we're seeing the downside of that. Hopefully we'll have the pendulum swing back to the middle a little bit where we have some accountability built in. On public safety, in addition to sort of the violent crimes we talked about a little bit, homelessness and drug activity is another one I hear about quite a bit in all the various communities throughout Snohomish County. And oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes these issues go hand in hand. When you have somebody who's living on the street or in an encampment, more likely than not there is some sort of an underlying either substance abuse addiction or a mental health issue or some combination of the two. So we have a point-in-time count that we do annually in Snohomish County, and it sort of serves as a count for our countywide homeless population. In 2024, that count was down, which is a good sign. However, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily making progress on the issue, because what we did see is that overdose deaths are increasing. Overdose, what were the other ones that were increasing? Drug abuse is increasing, so we are seeing some of the issues persist, even though the literal homeless count may be decreasing. And I think part of the reason for that is the introduction of fentanyl. So how many of us have heard of fentanyl? Yeah, it's about 100 times more potent than morphine. When I first started on the county council, heroin was kind of the drug of choice. That was a big issue we were facing with prescription opioids and then people transitioning onto heroin. Now you almost never hear about heroin anymore because fentanyl has been pretty widespread in our communities. It's a synthetic opioid that comes from out of the country typically and then is brought into the country. It's much cheaper than heroin, much more potent, and so people, for cents on the dollar can buy heroin or buy fentanyl on the street and are actively using that. And the struggle with fentanyl is because it's so potent, you have so many overdoses as a result of that. You could hear in the past about whether it's somebody who is addicted to meth or heroin or cocaine, whatever it was, they had sort of these, functioning addicts, so to speak, that they were using and then they would go do other things. But you just don't have that with fentanyl because of how quickly people are dying as a result. You don't have long-term fentanyl addicts more than a year or two because of the high overdose rates. And so this is really wreaking havoc, not just in Snohomish County, but throughout our country. We're seeing, I think every county in the country would say this is the top challenge we face is this fentanyl crisis and trying to get a grip on that. So what are we doing to address it? What we try to do is take a two-pronged approach. There's the compassion side where we want to make sure we're getting people into treatment and options to get them past their addiction and back into a healthy and sustainable lifestyle. But then there's also the accountability piece where we want to make sure that we're holding people accountable who are committing crimes, whether that's property crimes to feed a drug addiction or whatever it may be. We have to have a public safety component to make sure that we're addressing these issues and being responsive to the community who's suffering as a result of a lot of these crimes that are being committed. And so we have teams throughout Snohomish County called embedded social worker teams that have both social workers and law enforcement officers that will go out into homeless encampments. And typically how that conversation works is the social worker would say, hey, we can get you into detox and treatment, housing and job training and so on and so forth. We can get you in today. But if you decide not to take that help, we're not going to allow you to just live under the bridge and do fentanyl or whatever the drug is and just let you die out here. That's not an option. So we've got the law enforcement component too, and the police officer, is able to make arrests when needed if there's outstanding warrants or if there's crimes being committed. And so we try to have that sort of a hammer and or a carrot and stick approach, leading with compassion but having the accountability built in. We have made several investments as a county into treatment facilities. So we've got the diversion center at the county campus, the Carnegie Resource Center. We've got a substance use treatment center, which has been converted where the Denny Juvenile Justice Center is in Everett. And then there's some private sector resources as well, like Home and Recovery Center and Smoky Point and others. And so we do have resources available and continue to invest in resources to make sure that for those who are willing to take on treatment and get past the addiction, that we're able to meet them where they're at and walk with them until they're back into a place where they're sober and back into a functioning lifestyle where they can be a contributing member of society. Where it becomes difficult is when you come across people who are just unwilling to take any treatment that's being offered. And it's tough with fentanyl. I was out on a ride along with one of our embedded social worker teams not too long ago, and they were talking with somebody who was, they were living out of like a derelict RV in South Snohomish County and clearly struggling with a drug addiction. And the social workers gave the gentleman a card and said, hey, we can get you into treatment or whatever's needed and we can help you. And he said, I've been through detox before, and I would rather die than go through detox again. It was so miserable. Because by all accounts, when your body's so addicted to just a drug like fentanyl, the pain and misery of going through a detox and the physical pain of that is very difficult. And so you can just see the issue that this creates, right? Where people aren't able to make these decisions for themselves, the correct decision they need to make to get better. And so we've got to find a way to interact that and make sure that we are, again, encouraging people that they need to do that. We're not going to allow them to just continue living that way.
So you're saying that fentanyl users are more reluctant to get treatment than previous?
Yes, I think that's right. There's always been a subset of the population. I mean, it'd be nice to think that everybody who's struggling with homelessness and addiction, it's just a matter of can we get them resources, can we get them housing, and then we fix the issue. Unfortunately, it's just not that simple. There's a decent chunk of the population that even if you gave them housing, whatever it is, they would say, no, I prefer to continue the addiction because of what it does chemically to their brains and, you know, the physical difficulties of getting sober. But certainly it is worse with fentanyl. Yeah, good question. Any other questions on public safety before I move on to the county budget?
So how do you get the word out for these services and centers? I mean, how do you
Yeah, so we
do
have
the social services?
Yep. So we have teams like social workers, and our law enforcement is, has this as well, where they're proactively going out into known encampments and areas where people are congregating and making sure that people know about this. And a lot of times it's sort of your frequent flyers. I mean, it's pretty rare, I think, that they come across people they haven't seen before. So in general, I think amongst this community, they know about the resources, which is good, and then continuing to do that outreach. But we also work with our cities and with other jurisdictions to make sure that we're partnering together so that if somebody is in need of a resource, we're able to connect those people.
About the gangs, I have to always think of that as a city problem.
Sure.
Like, I've heard there's gangs in Mount Vernon, Everett. Are there gangs in Arlington?
Well, so as I understand it, and I'm no expert, but from talking with like folks in our sheriff's office, these gangs operate out of like King County, Seattle, but they sort of work throughout the Puget Sound. So they'll go down to Pierce County, up here to Snohomish. So we have had gang activity up in Arlington, certainly in Everett, but they're typically not based in Arlington or Everett. It's typically kind of housed in Seattle, but they're, doing, selling drugs or whatever it is, guns, and they do that up and down the I-5 corridor.
Yeah, I've never heard of anything about gang activity here.
Right, yeah. We want to keep it that way. Yeah, we want to keep it that way, yeah. All right. So next up, the county budget. So we've got a county budget of about $2.5 billion annually that we biannually that we appropriate. We used to do an annual budget. We've since switched to a biennial budget, passing a budget every 2 years. Most cities and counties do this. It allows for better long-term planning, more fiscal responsibility, and so we've made that transition just last year, and it seems to be working pretty well. You look at the pie chart here, this is an average property tax bill, and it just shows where your tax dollars go. So you get, all of us will get twice a year our property tax bill from the county treasurer, and when you pay that property tax bill, it goes to the treasurer, and then the treasurer's office disperses those funds amongst these taxing entities. So you've got, the lion's share is going towards schools, and that's both local school districts as well as the state, which then gets distributed to schools. You've got your fire districts, county, cities, if you live in a city like Stanwood, libraries, ports, if you're in a port district, hospital districts. So there's all sorts of junior taxing districts that all make up sort of that pie that is your property tax bill. Each of these different entities makes independent decisions on whether to raise their portion of property taxes or not. So as a county, one of my priorities has been to try to limit those increases as much as possible. I've consistently voted against raising property taxes. I think it's really important that we look to stretch your dollar as far as they can go and increase efficiency, cut costs where we can, eliminate any wasteful spending, and then if it's needed, then we can ask voters for a tax increase. But I don't think that's the case right now, so we've tried to push back on that. One of the things I'm really proud of about our budget, like I mentioned, we've got a budget of about $2.5 billion for every 2 years. A lot of that is grant funding, but it goes to fund a whole host of services throughout the county, our roads, our parks, our sheriff's department, elections, the court system, and a whole host of other services. When I came into office in 2017, we had a rainy day fund of about $25,000. You think about that proportion of the entire budget, that's not a very big rainy day fund. It's since been built up to over $14 million over the past several years, and so I'm glad that the council has made that a priority and will continue to do that, so that when we do get a rainy day, we're not having to resort to major changes like layoffs and those sorts of things.
So you have an annual expenditure budget of $1.2 billion.
Yep, that's correct.
And your reserves are $14 million.
Well, I should say, so this is like a specific rainy day fund. There's a fund balance that's about 14% of the fund. So that fund balance exists.
Okay.
But a rainy day fund, like in the event of a major economic downturn or something like that, was what was built up. Yeah, good. Thanks for that clarification.
Nate, do you get any federal grants And are they in jeopardy, or could they be in jeopardy?
Yeah, good question. There's been a lot of questions about this recently. Certain county departments do rely pretty heavily on state and federal grants. So like our Human Services Department is a good example. A lot of that money that they operate with it comes straight from the federal government, sometimes from the state. Oftentimes when we're doing roads projects or parks projects, we'll partner county funds with state and or federal funds. And so there is a lot of work that the county does that is reliant on state and federal funding. There was a recent executive order that paused federal funding, and that kind of threw everybody for a scare. That was rescinded though, and so currently there are no issues. We're operating as normal. There is the potential in the future, depending on what happens with federal funding, that could impact the county, but nothing at this point has changed. Yeah, good question. So these are some examples of some projects in North Snohomish County, some larger projects that have been funded recently. We've got the Stanwood Dike Repair Project, which I think most of you are familiar with. It's been a big priority for Stanwood, important for public safety, in the event of another a flood that could cause some significant damage. And so we put $7 million toward that. I know that the city has put some money in. Representative Larson has put some in at the federal level, and I think the state has come in as well. So that's a good kind of example of how local, state, and federal level can all work together to fund an important project. Kayak Point, there's been a lot of work happening there, and that'll continue this summer. And then in other areas of the county, one example is the Oso Slide Memorial. If you haven't had a chance to visit that, it's a really beautiful memorial and a tribute in Oso. We unveiled that at the 10-year anniversary, and that's a really special one. Here are some more local projects to the Stanwood area. So Pioneer Highway, road preservation, $1 million from the county. The Heritage Park dugouts are pictured here. Pioneer Highway conservation easement, and then an additional easement on Old Pacific Highway. So, between our county roads, our county parks, and other funds, we're able to target funding into specific areas. So these are some examples in the Stanwood area. Yes?
I'm just curious on the dike work.
Yeah.
Has that work started, or are you still gathering the funds before you start, or where is that at?
Yeah, good questions. So it's interesting, when we started on that issue, there was the flood issue, when was that, 2021, I want to say, where there was a flood that, the dike was breached. And immediately everybody's like, we got to pull together the funding. And it was such a huge dollar amount that we thought, man, this is going to be a huge hurdle to get all the money put together. Well, thanks to a lot of great work from the city of Stanwood and from, again, our state and federal partners, we were able to overcome the big hurdle of putting the funding. So this is a fully funded project. Now, unfortunately, we've run into kind of an unforeseen hurdle where the federal government has, if I understand it correctly, they have some sort of new rule, and this is about a year ago, where you have to put aside certain land for like an easement. So we have to find 50 acres of farmland or something to be able to put aside in order to move forward with the project, and we have not been able to identify that yet. So it's very frustrating because the funding is all there, but we're having to jump through sort of these bureaucratic hoops at the federal level to move forward with the project through the Army Corps of Engineers. So I know the city's working hard on that, trying to see if we can partner with tribes or other entities to get that hoop jumped through. Once that is the case, then we can start immediately on the work. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is jobs. So I've talked about this before. One of the highlights in North Snohomish County that we have is the Cascade Industrial Center. So this is that 4,000 acres of manufacturing industrial land in North Marysville, South Arlington, kind of the Arlington Airport area. And these 4,000 acres were set aside a decade or two ago, for job growth, to house family wage jobs. In the past 10, 20 years, there's been lots of efforts by developers to, convince the cities to turn this land into multifamily housing and other sorts of things, and they've been very diligent in saying, no, we need to set aside some area for job growth so that people who live in North County, who grow up in North County and graduate from our schools can have a place where they can work and earn a living here, as opposed to having to, battle traffic down to Seattle or some other place to have a good paying job. And so we're now seeing the fruits of that. We've seen some really innovative businesses come into the industrial center. Some of the new ones listed here are in Chandia, which is doing marine battery manufacturing. I recently toured Aviation, which is creating the world's first fully electric commuter aircraft. And then Gravitics is a really cool one. I might have touched on this last year, but they're building space modules. And so I had a chance to tour their facility, and their CEO said, they predict within the next 20, 30 years, space travel will be somewhat frequent. So they said, when you're taking a vacation up to outer space, you might look out your window and see space modules that were built in your hometown. So kind of an interesting thing to think about. I don't know if I want to be doing space travel in 20 years, but maybe that'll be a possibility. But really interesting that sort of innovation is happening right here in Snohomish County.
Was that the one that's on the Everett waterfront? That the area where this is located?
No, so this one is, Gravitics is in Marysville. And this industrial center is Marysville, Arlington, but there are a lot of innovative businesses on the waterfront as well that are sort of in the same sectors. So you may be thinking of a similar business that is in that area. One that I'm really proud of is the Regional Apprenticeship Pathways Program. I know I've talked about this in the past. Stanwood Camano School District is a great partner here. Before getting into elected office, I was a middle school science teacher. And so, I got to see firsthand kind of this national push toward getting all students down this 4-year college pipeline, which is great for a lot of people. I mean, I went to a 4-year school, and there can be a lot of value there. But I think it's really critical that we give our students as many options as possible for career pathways, whether that's the trades, entrepreneurship, military, and there's all sorts of good pathways to successful careers. And we shouldn't be limiting our students or trying to push them all toward one particular pathway. So we were able to get a group together of local school districts, of labor groups, of industry leaders, and say, how can we bring this sort of training back into the high school? And we established together the Regional Apprenticeship Pathways Program, which does just that. It brings hands-on training in the skilled trades to the RAP Center at Marysville-Pilchuck High School. And this is located at Marysville-Pilchuck, but it's open to students countywide. So it has served and continues to serve students from the Stanwood Camano School District, as well as I think a dozen other school districts in Snohomish County. And these students, when they graduate high school, graduate with a high school diploma, with a college credential to Everett Community College, and then with either preferred or direct entry into a state-certified apprenticeship program. So it sets them up really nicely to go into a successful career in the skilled trades. And you can see some of the the early work that these students are doing, and they culminate their project is to build a tiny home that they donate to, I can't remember the name of a nonprofit in Seattle that it's used to help the homeless. So these students are doing electrical work on the home, they're doing all the framing and everything, and then they end up donating that. So it's a really, really cool program. And then the last thing I'll touch on before opening up for questions is civil discourse. Like I said at the beginning, there's lots of challenges that we face. There's lots of great opportunities that we have in the future. One of the things outside of sort of direct policy work that I've really prioritized and had a lot of enjoyment in doing is working with a colleague of mine from Mill Creek. So, in local government, most of the work we do is nonpartisan. Like 99% of the work, we're filling potholes, we're citing parks, not a whole lot of partisan stuff. But we do have to run in Snohomish County as elected Republicans or Democrats. So I'm an elected Republican. My colleague here from South Snohomish County, Councilmember Mead, is an elected Democrat. And we've gone out into different high schools throughout the community. We were at Stanwood last year, different organizations to talk about the importance of working across the aisle and civil discourse. And if I can summarize what is usually a little bit of a longer talk, it's you don't have to hate somebody just because they have different political beliefs than you. It's okay to disagree on a policy issue and shake the person's hand and say, let's move on and see if there's something that we can work together on, some other issue. And so we've tried to do that. I think given a lot of the hostility that maybe you see at the national and state level sometimes, it can be sort of a turnoff for young people. They might say, why would I want to go into government as a career if this is all I see? And so I think it's important that, as community leaders, we demonstrate that it's okay to disagree, and we can do that in a respectful way and still hold to what our values are, but we can, still have friendships and relationships with people who might think differently or have different backgrounds than us. And so we've been really excited about that work. We've also hosted a Civic Education Day every year at the county campus. It started off with just like 50 kids. I think last year it was about 100. This year we had over 300 students come to the county campus just a couple of weeks ago. And so it's really exciting to see that interest growing. Well, I really appreciate all of your time. It's a blessing to get to serve you all on the county council. I have my contact info here. If you ever have any questions or issues or suggestions, I have an open door policy, so I'd love to hear from you. If there's ever anything I can do to help you, if you have ideas for how we can move the community forward, and I'm happy to answer any questions here if anybody has any. Yeah.
I
I think I asked this question last time. Give us an update on, Smoky Point area, the, entrance back on the freeway to the south of, Costco, cause that, I tell you, I stay away from Smoky Point, it's just,
Yeah.
traffic there is, if you're coming from the west, going to the east,
Right, from the Lakewood area.
oh, yeah,
Yep.
sometimes the traffic is backed up from that, roundabout all the way back past the Lakewood post office.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it looks like it's gonna be getting worse because there's so much, multifamily development happening there.
More apartments when they haven't figured out the traffic yet.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. So kind of two separate questions there I'll try to address. The first, the congestion is very difficult. My in-laws live out in the Lake Goodwin area, and so travel that road pretty regularly, and there's a ton of congestion. One of the things that will be helpful, although it's fairly far out, is there's going to be a brand new interchange at 156th Street. So if you're driving north from, say, Everett, before you get to Smoky Point, you'll see an overpass at 156. That's going to be turned into a full-fledged interchange. And the purpose of that is to divert the congestion at 172nd. So ideally, you'll have people taking that interchange. But while that's been fully funded, you know how long it takes the state to build out these big transportation projects. So it could be several years before that actually gets completed. And on the housing question, this is a big frustration I have and a lot of local elected officials have is, the infrastructure is never able to keep up with the housing. We have in our state a growth management act that was passed in the 90s, when our population was much smaller, and it has really not been changed even today, 30 years later. And the Growth Management Act requires counties to take on certain growth targets from the state. So the state and the Puget Sound Regional Council tell the county, you have to zone for X amount of people. For us, it's like 200,000 people over the next 20 years. Well, then we have to work with our cities to figure out how are we going to change our zoning throughout the county to accommodate all that growth. We're forced to zone for it. Whether the growth actually happens is up to the private sector, right? It's up to whether developers come in and decide to build or not, which they're doing in the Smoky Point area. So it's a big frustration because I think a lot of us would love to say, hey, hold on, let's put a pause on this. We've grown quite a bit. Our infrastructure isn't keeping up. But because it's a state mandate, we don't really have a choice but to zone for it. And then again, if the private sector decides to bring the growth, then that's what happens. Very frustrating issue, I know, for a lot of us. But until the state changes that law or adjusts it, I don't see a change coming.
When do you foresee the earliest that new interchange could come?
I think it's supposed to be fully built by like 2030 or 2031. So a good example is some of you see the work happening on I-5 in Marysville where they're building a new interchange sort of by the flats between Everett and Marysville. They added that HOV lane and then I think they just started building the actual interchange. So that was funded in 2015 and it's supposed to be completed this year, 2025. So that's 10 years from when it's fully funded. So 2030, 2031 would be my guess.
Are there any plans for Stanwood? We're all looking at all these things going up and the buildings going up and the 532 and the intersections and everybody's just cringing already. Is there any plans in place for handling the traffic better?
Yeah, right. 532 is another one where we have a lot of congestion, and going on to Camano too, I know I hear a lot about. So I know the city of Stanwood does a really good job in trying to advocate, their state legislators making sure this is a priority, and I've advocated along with the city for that. I don't know of any existing state funding for capacity increases on 532. So that's a battle we need to keep fighting to get funded in the state budget.
So I'm just curious, so does the county have like a 5-year master green space plan for the additional people that are planning to be in Snohomish County? What you're planning on doing with increased parks? Do you have a master plan for that?
Great question. We do have a master plan for our parks, and so I'd be happy to email that to you, or you can find it online on our website. Maybe I can include it in the follow-up. We also have a Conservation Futures board, which I chair, and that board is tasked specifically with purchasing land to set aside for whether it's conservation or agricultural land to make sure that that stays agricultural. So we do have some of these efforts in place to make sure that we're preserving some of our green spaces in the midst of all the development which is occurring.
So is there a plan for more additional parks to be
built.
implemented over the next 5 to 10 years?
To be built?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues that's been expressed to me by our county parks director is that we have so much county-owned park land and not enough resources to like maintain the parks or to build them out. He actually would like to see us transfer more parks to cities. So we recently transferred Twin Lakes Park to Marysville. I know I talked with Stanwood about, because Stanwood's really interested in new parks, and I'd love to see new parks too. So finding ways to partner with cities to make those happen, because we own a lot of like just passive land as a county that we have a hard time maintaining, and so then the resources for actually constructing a new park becomes difficult.
How many people live in Snohomish County?
We're at about 850 right now, 850,000, and we're projected to hit the 1 million mark, in the next decade or two. So we're growing pretty rapidly.
Well, thank you so much. One more?
Well, I'm just interested how a middle school science teacher ended up.
Oh, that's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, when I went through an appointment process in 2017. I was 21 years old at the time, and someone said, "You should put your name in for county council." And I thought, well, there's no way that they pick me, but here, I'll try it. And and they picked me, and the rest is history. So it's been, like I said, it's been a real blessing. I love getting to do this work and the wonderful community we have. And so, again, if any of you ever have any ideas that we should be working on, or criticisms or questions, I'd love to hear from you. I really appreciate the time today. Thank you all.
Thank you.